everyone, it's Nicole for Simon Says Stamp with some soft and pretty leafy frames. These two cards feature components from the June 2019 Simon Says Stamp card kit called Leafy Frames. We're going to start with some of the ivory cardstock from the kit and stamp large frames from this on the ivory cardstock. On the first one, I'm going to stamp the rectangular leafy frame, and on the other I am going to stamp the circular leafy frame. I'm using the cardstock from the kit to do some watercolor techniques. Because this isn't watercolor paper, I'm going to try to keep the amount of water I'm applying to this to a minimum so that the paper warps as little as possible. I'm stamping these leafy frame images with the Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink, and I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss these frames with antique gold Simon Says Stamp embossing powder. I notice as I'm heat setting this first frame that there's a little area that I didn't get stamped all the way, so the embossing powder is not sticking to anything because there's nothing there. I'm going to go ahead and wipe away any excess embossing powder from the edges of my card, heat set what I have, and because I've left my frame in my MISTI, I can go ahead and put this frame back in the MISTI and add a little ink to that area and re-stamp just that little corner, add the embossing powder, and then heat set that corner. That way I have a complete frame that doesn't have a partial stamping. I always like to leave my images in my MISTI until I make sure that I have the image stamped exactly the way I want, in case I need to put it back in and fix something like I am here. You can see I applied just a tiny bit of ink to those leaf areas that were missing a little bit of the detail. I'm a big fan of heat embossing embossed images and then watercoloring them because the embossed area holds that color in the area. I call it kind of cheating watercolor because it's very quick and easy. I'm using some awesome watercolors here to add. I'm adding a little water with my water brush pen to the little colors, the little pan colors here, and then picking the color up and applying it to the image. So anything that's this kind of rounded leaf image, I am adding in, this is color, let me double check here really quick. This is number 51, May Green. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the kind of oblong flower, or pardon me, leaves with 55 Green. It's a slightly different color. I'm letting that first green color on the larger leaves completely dry because I am going to go in and add some little bit more detail to those with 58 Evergreen. Very, very quickly applying the color. I'm not being super particular with that other than just laying that color down, getting the color on, and moving my way around the image. I can always add a little additional water if I need to spread that color out. This is going to give it a little depth and dimension. Much like the two-tone leaves, I am going to color the flowers with number 34 Dark Pink. I will let this dry and then go back over it with a darker color to deepen and darken and add some great detail. I like to keep a paper towel handy to clean off the tip of my water brush pen often as I'm working so I don't cross-contaminate one color with another. I'm using 33 Orange for a couple of these other blooms for a little additional color to pull that in because there's a lot of greenery going on. Then I'm layering 36 Wine Red over the pink blooms. Next, once this is dry, I'm really going to water down 50 Pale Aqua, and I'm going to go around the whole image just really quickly, kind of messily, and trace out this whole image. I'm not being super neat about it. I really wanted a loose watercolor kind of look where it just has this great shadow. So while the frame is super pretty, which you can see at the top of the frame there, super pretty as is, but I really love this pale aqua. It just gives it a little shadow, kind of helps make it pop a little bit, softens the edges. Just really, really pretty. This pale aqua, probably one of my most often used colors, just because it's so great for things like this. To get this pale color, I did water it down a lot. You can see when I accidentally pick up too much color, I need to add more color to my little pan, but I really tried to water it down quite a bit to get a really soft look. I'm going to let this completely air dry then, while I stamp my second frame. This is the circular frame. I wanted to show a couple of different options today. Again, I like to use a little dry paintbrush to remove any embossing flakes from where I don't want them. We'll heat set this frame, and then we are going to watercolor this exactly like our rectangular frame. So we're going to have not only the landscape style card, but I'm also going to have an option for the portrait style card. You could also make this circle go landscape. It doesn't have to be, and same with the rectangle. It could be a portrait style card. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. I just wanted to show a couple of different options using the stamp set from the June kit. Again, just like I did with the first card, I'm laying down all of the same ink colors. I did the leaves, I did the kind of oblong leaves. I went in and added the color for the flowers. We're going to layer the darker color over some of the larger leaf images to give a little more depth and dimension. We'll layer over the dark wine red over the pink flowers to give those more depth and dimension. And then we're going to go around the whole image with that pale aqua. So very, very similar. In fact, I picked up way too much color there. So I'm just kind of watering that down, spreading that around. But this is a really great way I wanted to show that you can even use watercolors with your regular paper. Not going to get exactly the same kind of results, but you still get very beautiful results if that's all you have on hand. And I'm always a big fan of using what you have on hand. So if you have this cardstock, you've picked up the kit, and you have some watercolors and you want to try something like this, this is a really, really fun technique. I'm going to let this frame dry all the way, and now I am ready to stamp the large sending from the Leafy Frames 6x8 clear stamp set included in the June kit in the center of my rectangular frame. I'm going to stamp this again with clear embossing ink and heat set this with the Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. To distress this background even more, we are going to water down some of the watercolor paints and flick them all over the surface. So we're going to have little splatters of paint all over. I like to make sure that the base is completely dry, all that background watercoloring is completely dry, so that the colors don't blend together. Then I'm going to apply water to the little pans, and I'm going to pick up that color with a small paintbrush, and I'm going to start with the 91 bluish gold on this one, and it's really just a gold color that's going to kind of help pull out the gold embossing we have, and I'm going to flick this all over the surface. I also should mention my backgrounds are both A2 sized at this point, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. We can trim them down later. I always like to start with a larger piece of paper and then trim it down. And you'll see that in a little bit because we're going to add some nice decorative pattern paper along the edges to just bring more color into these card designs. I also flicked on some pale aqua. We're going to set that aside to completely dry, and we're going to do the same thing for the Hello portrait style background. So our background is dry. We're going to take the Hello sentiment from the Leafy Frames 6x8 clear stamp set, stamp this in the center with our clear embossing ink, and heat emboss with the antique gold embossing powder. Then we're also going to distress the background of this card with our pale aqua and bluish gold watercolors. I started with the pale aqua for this one, and I went a little heavier with pale aqua, and I used very minimum bluish gold. There's still a little bluish gold on here, but I didn't use near as much. I will also let this set aside to completely air dry. And once dry, I'm going to take the Simon Says Stamp Scallop Stitches dies, and using the medium-sized die, I'm going to die cut a scallop border along both long edges of both backgrounds. This instantly adds a decorative scallop border and a stitched border. This die set is one of my very favorites. I use it over and over again when I have a card like this that I want to add something kind of decorative to that doesn't take away from the beautiful stamping and coloring. I'm using my Tim Holtz glass mat to help line up my paper and my die to get this as straight as possible. This glass mat comes in handy for so many things. This is just one of them I find it great for. I'm going to do the same thing for the second background as well. So both are going to end up with this great stitched and scalloped border along the sides or top and bottom, depending on which background it is. Then I'm going to take one of the Carta Botanical Garden 6x6 pattern papers from the June kit and trim it into about 3/4 of an inch wide strips. I'm going to just leave them long. I can always trim them down once I have them on my card. What we're going to do is adhere these along the top or side edges of the background, depending on which one we're using. The reason I trim this down is instead of wasting all the paper behind the watercolor panel, I want to get as much from one little 6x6 piece of pattern paper as I can. So while it looks like there's this stripe paper all the way back behind our watercolored panels, it's actually just a small strip. I even have some left over to use on additional projects. We're going to glue our background in place then, and I really love this subtle little touch of color that these strips add along the edges of the card. They help pull out the pinks from the flowers, and I think it really works nicely. I'm going to trim up those strips then to fit the card front. To finish the card design, I want to stamp an additional small phrase from the Leafy Frames 6x8 clear stamp set on the green leaf cardstock included in the kit. That's going to help pull out some of the green that we've watercolored in this beautiful design. I'm going to stamp the phrase "You, Joy, and Love" so that the sentiment reads "Sending you joy and love." I'm going to stamp that with a clear embossing ink, and this time emboss with white embossing powder before die cutting with one of the Simon Says Stamp Nested Banners dies. I love these little dies because they are great basics for die cutting your sentiments into a fun little shape on your cards. I'm buffing away that excess powder there. I just used my sleeve. I usually use a dry rag. Once I've die cut that, and you can see it's got these great little angled edges, I'm going to take some foam adhesive, place that on the back, and pop this onto my card. We're going to do the same thing for the second card, only use a different phrase that says "Hugs and Kisses." We're going to use the exact same Nested Banners die to die cut that. Here's a look at both of the finished cards with that beautiful embossing, watercoloring, the pattern paper strip, and then all of the fantastic sentiments. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these two cards featuring the Simon Says Stamp June 2019 Card Kit Leafy Frames. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.